but sort of, I don't know. But reading Ed's Father's Day, Three Generations, I just want to share some of it. Do you think that's
Great.
okay?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, good. So it's about 30 seconds. So for those of you who still have fathers or are fathers, I hope that this means something to you. I do not. But listen to what Ed says. He says, "In loving memory on Father's Day for the men who built the foundation I stand on. To my great grandfather, Thomas Hawthorne, who was born in a world that did not recognize your humanity. You entered this life just 5 years before the chains of slavery were broken. Whatever storms you weathered in those years and in the difficult decades that followed, you survived, you endured, and in doing so, you made everything else possible. To my grandfather, Vernon Hawthorne, you dared to own land during Jim Crow, in an era when Black prosperity was met with hostility and fear. That took courage most will never understand. You planted roots when others tried to deny you soil. You built something lasting when the world told you that you could not, and you did it anyway. To my father, Nathaniel Hawthorne, you wore the uniform of a nation still figuring out how to treat you as an equal, and you served it faithfully for 21 years, 2 tours in Vietnam. You enlisted just 7 years after President Truman ordered the integration of the military, a process that itself took another 6 years to fully implement. You stepped into ranks that only recently had been forced open in a country that was still marching against your people in the streets back home. Yet you served it with distinction, marched through jungles, and never let the contradictions of that moment diminish your commitment to your family or to your duty. Your sacrifice was real, your valor was real, and your love never wavered through any of it. 3 generations, 3 different battles, one unbroken line of strength. You are all gone now, but I carry you with me in my backbone, in my resolve, in a way I refuse to quit. Your legacy is not just memory, it's inheritance. So, Edward Thomas Hawthorne, descendant of Thomas, Vernon, and Nathaniel, I am proud and unapologetically Black. Being unapologetically Black is an act of radical self love and racial pride. It means embracing my authentic Black identity, culture, and experience without seeking approval, altering my behavior for comfort, or feeling remorse for my experience in a society shaped by systematic racism. Happy Father's Day. Rest easy. I've got it from here. We got this.
Oh, that is really meaningful. That is really inspiring. I'm so glad that you shared that. It's
I
very, very touching, quite emotional. I appreciate that it reminds us all not only of the struggles um, that these people endured, continue to endure, but the strength and the resourcefulness and the persistence um, generationally. And that's it's just a really powerful statement.
Yeah, I what I loved about Ed's about his letter about his Happy Father's Day to his ancestors. He said, "We got it from here." And so, for me, that was saying, "Don't worry, don't worry. We got it." And I think the reason that it was sort of different for me this year. I was at Juneteenth yesterday, and we talked a lot about those 2.5 years that it took uh, for these folks in Texas, in Galveston, Texas, to know that they had been freed, our ancestors, 2.5 years. And, they could have just been like, well, what are we going to do now? And I think the whole point is that even delayed, it was not defeat. And that when joy comes, no matter how long it takes, you have to celebrate it and work at making sure joy works. And I think that's what Ed is saying here. So he recognized the work is not done, but he says, "We got it from here. We got it from here." And I think that gives us the other piece of this with the Obama Center opening on Thursday and then on Juneteenth. I think that was powerful too. So, what thoughts do you have, and anybody who is here with us today, your thoughts about whatever you happen to see well, whether it reflected in Juneteenth or with the Obama Center opening, which, by the way, you can't get in until November, by the way. So,
Right, because it is gorgeous and everyone wants to go and visit it. I should mention that hello, Andrew. I see that Andrew said hi to me, so I'll say hi to everyone. Um, e so I think that we really had juxtaposition this week, didn't we? So we saw almost what an alternative timeline would have looked like, and it was both something to really celebrate and be joyful about that, here we have a beautiful center. We heard beautiful music, we heard wonderful speeches. Um, but at the same time, like, we can celebrate that and be joyful about that, and at the same time hold the grief of what might have been. Um, because you could see how all of that could have been our everyday in an alternative universe had the 2024 election gone a different way. And so it was both like heartwarming and heartbreaking. I was having all these different emotions, and I imagine a lot of other people did as well. It was really difficult, and then adding in, Juneteenth on top of that. It's just layer upon layer of really complicated emotional work that I think we're all doing as a country. Um, we need like national therapy. I think.
I I I agree. My husband would probably say that I need therapy. So, I see Sam is here, Robin Warner, thank you for being here.
Hi,
All of
Robin.
you who are out here, thank you for being here. I see Lauren Burke is here. Hi, Lauren. We're happy for each and every one of you who decided to take some time to be with us tonight. I wanna talk about what you and I were talking about earlier. I was telling you that I had stumbled on an article, "America's largest concentration camp is in El Paso. Why aren't we talking about it?" And I told you that they spent $1 billion on this concentration camp in Camp East Montana, which has all kinds of atrocities going on inside of it. And I told you that I read the article and I said to my husband, "Lord have mercy." And he said, "Well, you're gonna need to calm down. You're so empathetic about everything." And I said, "But, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to feel? If we don't talk about this, then who's talking about it?" And then you shared with me, when I said, "It's hard to know what to do." So tell everybody what you shared with me. You asked me if I saw a movie.
Yes, I did. But first, I will say that the thing that I wanted that I hope everyone remembers is that empathy is both one of the hardest things for us to manage, but it's also one of the most essential things that we have. Our sense of empathy, our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and our desire to fight for them. That's actually that's the fuel, right? That's what can fuel the anger and the power that we need for the next phase that we're going through, which obviously is going to culminate in the midterm elections. And hopefully, we will knock that out of the park. And, we have to run up the score as much as we possibly can in November. So, um, even though those stories are difficult to read, and difficult to share with people, I think it's important to do that so that we remember what we're fighting for, and keep our humanity intact. But I was also sharing a very different kind of content with you because I've started rewatching. I don't know if anyone who's with us tonight is a Star Wars fan. There are probably a few because Star Wars is a really popular series, obviously. But there is uh, another, I don't know, I guess it's just a series that's based on Star Wars called Andor. And it's about a man named Cassian Andor who is involved in the rebellion before BBY, before the Battle of Yavin. You can tell I have a 14-year-old son. So we follow Cassian Andor and his friends, his colleagues for a few years here. And one of the and as we were chatting before we got on this evening, I was explaining that one of the people who I love the most in this series, his name is Nemec, and he's a young man. He's I don't know, a teenager or early 20s. And he's the one who writes a manifesto that bits and pieces of it you no doubt have heard. In Star Wars lore and probably seen them on memes and things, and it's all about how one of the things, and let me see if I still have the quote here, but one of the things that Nemec talks about is this idea that the empire has an easier time hiding 40 atrocities than one. And so it is speed. It is the speed of the awfulness that they engage in that allows them to get away with so much more because we can't keep up. And it's familiar to us going through this and living through, really the United States descent into, an authoritarian kind of regime, right? Where they're trying to do as many terrible, awful things as they possibly can before we can possibly react. Um, and it's validating in a lot of ways to have something like that just repeated back in a movie, well, in a series. So the actual quote itself is, "There will be times when struggle seems impossible. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. The frontier of the rebellion is everywhere. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. One single thing will break the siege. If you can remember only thing, remember this. Try."
So that's where we are, and I love that because it sort of gives this hopefulness, this Father's Day, this Juneteenth weekend, this Obama Center opening, this Ed Hawthorne celebration of his ancestors, that we just keep at it.
Yeah,
And because I,
you
I
try.
was, yeah, we just keep on trying. And I was thinking about this when I was reading about this camp, and I was going to I'm going to tell you guys what it is so that you can find it. But it's America's largest concentration camp is in El Paso. Why aren't we talking about it? And it's Lisa Gonzalez is the author of this piece. And I would encourage everyone to go and read it because it's really powerful. Indivisible groups go just about every day and stand at the gates of this place, and it was $1 billion. And
So why do
Michelle,
you feel like we're not talking about it? Why do you feel like that we haven't grabbed onto this particular story?
so I think because exactly what you said. So we've been talking about Delaney, we've been talking about Dilley, we've been talking about Alligator Alcatraz. This one, I think, um, because there's so many. So like you said, it's easier to hide 40 than one. And so I think that's what happened here. And I think the other reason is for me, we've been talking about this whole money thing about, what happens with numbers, that after a while they get so big that you don't know what to do with it. But with the discussions that we've been having about how do you take, what is happening with all of this money, the grift, the corruption, and take it and let people feel what it's actually buying for them, nothing, but for those who are getting richer. Like this particular place that costs $1 billion has to have water, sent in every single day. So
Right.
you paid $1 billion for a place, but you have to ship in water every single day. So so
So, I mean,
means
there's layers and layers on that, right?
yeah,
So you spent $1 billion to put this together and presumably to keep it running for a year or for a certain amount of time. You've also now taken people out of the workforce who many of whom were actually working and paying taxes, so there's a drain on local and state and federal budgets because those people have been taken out of the workforce. You've altered entire community spending. You've decreased the amount that local businesses get in. There's so many effects to pulling so many people out of their communities. Not to mention the awful emotional and social impact. I mean, it's ripping families apart. It's been traumatizing for everyone. There's no good reason to do it. And $1 billion, for people's just frame of reference, the average amount that the big, beautiful bill gave to states to help them revitalize their rural infrastructure for their hospitals, the average amount was 200 million. So that means five more states could have gotten $200 million. But instead, we decided to put people who don't belong in a prison in the desert. It is inhumane, it's awful, but it's hard to describe. And I think that's the other reason why we don't hear about some of these stories. It's easy for people to understand algae.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, that's easy. You can see it, you can witness it. It's also ridiculous, right? So there's some sort of layer of things where it doesn't feel, the stakes aren't as high. But when you're talking about human beings who are being housed inhumanely in the desert and it is costing us $1 billion, that is layer upon layer, again, emotionally and intellectually. And I think that anymore, it's difficult for people to tune in the way that we want them to and need them to.
Yeah, and so, I this is what I am shocked, at sometimes is I talk about this stuff because I have this feeling, deep in my belly, this feeling of anxiety about what I see and hear, and sometimes it feels like that other people aren't feeling the sense of anxiety, and, we talk about it and we go, "Oh, if you scare people, they become paralyzed and they don't know what to do." And, so we talk about eggs and bacon and beef and, gasoline because that's what people use every day, but we don't talk about the people who are suffering every day, the children who are hungry, the family, because that's ugly talk, and we don't wanna have that discussion. We don't wanna have the discussion about, people being shot in the face, in Minnesota. We don't wanna hear about all of these things that are happening, and people don't wanna talk about it, but I had this idea that we should be talking about it, and that we should put it in the faces of people to see what's happening, and that's probably, one of the things that happened, y y you know, du uh, during the Holocaust, is that people were right next door, not paying attention to what was happening, and we should not do that again. It is what happened during slavery and Jim Crow. People were right in the midst and didn't do anything. But it became a thing when people could actually see the horror, the ugly, the way that people were being terrorized, and we have to figure out how to do that. So I don't know an answer. Maybe someone here knows an answer. I know Black Virginia News is here. But I'm curious about those of you who are here, the way that you sort of cope with some of this stuff and how you talk about it to people who probably don't wanna hear it.
It's a really difficult question, right? Because I think you're right. People have a tendency to tune out things that are too emotional, that are too difficult, and to turn away. And so there's anymore with our news being driven largely by clicks. So more stories are written about what gets clicks. So if you actually, this is a good tip, good pro
Mhm.
tip. If you want more stories about something, click on those news stories, because that will that will teach the editors that that's actually something that people want to read. So that's a good pro tip for you to try to get more coverage on things. But that's why I think a lot of these stories are being underreported.
So let's talk a little bit about how you frame things. And you talked a little bit about it a few minutes ago when you said that how many more rural hospitals could
Yeah,
be funded. And I don't know. So I think this is really interesting. So they cut $1.1 trillion from Medicaid, which will happen over a 10-year period. So a 1.1 trillion cut from Medicaid, and then so 15 million people over 10 years are projected to lose health insurance. And
right.
so I'm guessing that people will feel that, but we have to start talking about that now. And I love the way you reframe these things in a way that people can sort of see themselves and see the money that could be used to change their lives, but it's not happening because it's not the way we talk about it. So can you talk about that a little bit and how we did it a little bit last week, but I'd love to hear a little more about how you were thinking about this.
Sure. So I come at this as someone with a legal degree. I was a communications and an English major when I was an undergrad. I did not have a background in mathematics.
Mhm,
Uh, but I had a background essentially in storytelling, right?
mhm,
Either as a writer, as a communicator, or as a lawyer. You know, trying to get my ideas across to a judge or a jury or set of arbitrators, whomever.
mhm,
And I think what's really important is for us to remember our audience and remember who we're talking to, and who we're trying to impact with whatever story we're telling.
mhm.
So when we're saying things like $1 billion, most of us, I mean, unless you're related to Elon Musk, you probably, or Jeff Bezos, you probably don't really have a very good frame of reference for what $1 billion is. It is such a massive number that it's hard for us to visualize it. It's easy to visualize $100 or, even $1,000. $1 million isn't that unrealistic anymore. But $1 billion, people just don't really have a big frame of reference. So it's all about trying to find different numbers, different frames for people to use to make it so that we can evaluate these various different uses of funding, right? Because when Republicans come out and say, we've had the most transformative investment in rural healthcare in a generation, and it turns out that it's $200 million in average in these states, and then they turn around and they spend 5 times the average amount on one concentration camp, you can really look at that claim in a very different way, right? Same thing if we're talking about 15 million people losing their health insurance or losing access to Medicaid. That's hard for people to have a frame of reference for too, right? So whenever I'm looking at numbers of people, I tend to default to cities and states. So that would
Mhm.
be like 15 million people would be about 3 Missouris,
Okay,
the state population of Missouri 3 times over,
okay.
basically.
So
Right?
so
So I
let's
try to do things like that so that people can sit there and think through like, oh wow, that's a lot of people. But it hits differently when you talk about it that way, I think.
so here's one. So Moody's puts the price of the war in Iran at somewhere around 132 billion. The Pentagon said it was 29 billion, but we know that it's more than that. But when Moody does its estimates, they do a whole bunch of stuff, gas prices, how much people have paid, all that stuff. And so it's somewhere around 132 billion. We have affordable housing as a crisis. So if we were to close the affordable housing gap, that would be 7.2 million houses across the country. That's how many we need. That's the missing number of homes.
Right.
So based on what we spent in the war, we could close the entire gap and still have 29 billion left. So
Right.
I think that's important when we're thinking about these things and how to frame these stories is that what we could do is you can now see yourself you can now see yourself, um, inside of this monies, and we chatted this last week, and I just think it's important enough to chat again this week, that when people say, "My vote doesn't matter," or, "I it's a waste of time for me to vote," you can say, "Well, tell me more about that," and you can get to the place where just the basic kinds of things that they need, you can say, "Well, what if you had $1 billion, what would you do with it?" And then you can get to our representatives have a choice about how they spend money.
Right.
And the ones that you have didn't make that choice. They decided to spend it either giving money to wealthy billionaires who don't need it, but they didn't choose to give it to you.
Right. Right.
Okay,
That is
Robin, I see a postcard coming.
uh I'd love to mention too that if it's $130 billion, that I mean, I've heard estimates that go all the way up to $1 trillion. So it's going to be difficult, I think, for us to really unpack how much has been spent on this war that was not war.
Right, right.
You know, but even just extending the ACA subsidies for 1 year, that would have been $30 billion. So we could have done that for 1 year to give us some time to negotiate and to talk about things for the midterms to happen, for them to really get, the idea that the American people really wanted these subsidies to continue. There's so many things that you can do. I mean, there's all the things that people want, right? So universal childcare, universal family leave, for all workers, not just federal workers, affordable housing, all removing lead from the pipes. Like all these things have price tags, and they've all been figured out. Like we know approximately how much it would be for us to implement a universal family leave. It's about $200 billion. That's it. That's it. We could have that. For $200 billion, people could have universal family leave if you have a medical emergency, if you have a baby, you get leave. Wouldn't that be incredible? It would be amazing, and we could do it. We absolutely could do it for $200 billion. We just have to implement something like it's Warren's tax plan. She has an ultra millionaire tax act. I love it. I think that's great. Let's do that. And then let's also add in Senator Gallego's Robin Hood bill, which gets rid of there's a buy, borrow, die.
Mhm,
It's kind of
mhm.
a terrible thing that they call it, but it's sort of a way that billionaires, ultra wealthy people operate with their funds. They buy something, they borrow against it, and they live off of that loan. And then when they die, they gift the actual thing that they purchased, which has since risen in value, and their heirs are able to take that asset at its higher value without paying, the increase in the taxes on the increase. And so they are able to essentially leapfrog over lots and lots of taxes. Well, we know they do that. We can close those loopholes. And that's what he's trying to do. There is no person on the planet that would look at somebody and say, well, you have things that you want to spend money on, and you only have so much money. What are you going to do? Not a person on the planet would say, well, you should decide to take fewer shifts at work, or you should work less, or you should take a lower paycheck. We have to do both things, right? We actually have to go and get more funding, which means getting taxes from people who are trying to shirk taxes, increase taxes on people who can pay, and then also looking at what we want to spend that money on. And the things that we want to spend that money on are not the things that money is being spent on currently. I don't think that people are really excited about spending $130 billion blowing up a country for no apparent good reason. No reason that I can tell. We have less now than what we had before he started bombing Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. It used to be open. When it is opened, they are going to start charging tolls. They did not charge tolls before. Iran is given more credence now in the region than they were previously. We've lost on every single metric. He's trying to give $300 billion, the United States as the guarantor. $300 billion, even if not a dime comes out of our pockets. That's $300 billion that's going to be spent and invested by that government, that regime, in exacting revenge. And so the American people are then going to have to pay for additional security and additional things to help us. This is a debacle beyond debacles, right? He should be impeached for this alone. Just for this alone, he should be impeached.
So let me say this, because I think this is
I know.
really
Sorry, I'm going off.
you had a good one. This was a good run. So listen at this. So I remember hearing Vance say something like at one point that someone said this, that they weren't going to take the money and invest it in their schools and in their kids, which is almost laughable. because we took $187 billion out of SNAP. So we took $187 billion out of SNAP, and we're gonna talk to someone else about what they're gonna do for their children. This is another thing that I think is really important. For every $1 taken from the poorest 10% of Americans, so if you just say whatever the bottom is, and there's a lot at the bottom, $11.30 was handed to the richest 10%. So I'd say all of this to say, for all of us to think about when we're talking with people, we'll have to do a little homework, and I think we can help with that. We
Yeah.
can help with that, so that when we're talking to friends and family, people, whether they are Republicans or probably not MAGA, but people who don't vote and think their vote doesn't matter, I think that this conversation frames it in a way where people can see that their vote absolutely does matter.
It
That
does.
that everything that you think about is important, matters, and I think that's what I wanna get to, because we want people to start feeling like, yeah, here's this money thing, but there's also this human thing that is happening, in this country, and I do think that people should ask themselves, "Who's next?" So if we are spending billions of dollars for these concentration camps, and why are we doing that? Who's getting the money? Why are they getting it? Especially if you're deporting people, why do we need them? So I think there's this deeper discussion that we need to have about the danger that we all could potentially be in because of what's happening in this country. And the last thing that I'll say in terms of the fight, and this is going to take the conversation another whole place, and we're already at 33 minutes, is this. This is what I was so angry about this weekend when Bill Pulte is the person who's going to take over security for the country and all the agencies. And I kept thinking, legally, you're supposed to have experience in order to be able to take on the job that he is taking on. So why would we not sue? Why would there not be a lawsuit for we the people that says you are putting us in danger because this person does not have the competency or the capability to do this function that will put the country in danger. So therefore, since it is illegal, we are suing and therefore stopping this process. I don't know that we can do that, but I'm just saying we have to start doing some things different, because we just can't let people do things that put all of us in danger and think that it's okay. Even if we don't get to keep the lawsuit, well, you're a lawyer, you can tell us this. Why can't we do something like that?
Well, I mean, I think what we're learning and what we have learned is that it is not enough for us just to have norms and for us to have the expectations and the belief that that's just the way it's always been done. We need to have a lot more very specific guardrails that have very specific trigger requirements or laws or something to that effect. I'd have to look and see, what their requirements were. I do know that some of the judges have started bringing causes of action. The issue that anyone would have with something like this would be what's called standing, which is making sure that you have the right to sue, that you've been personally harmed. And I think that any person who lives in the United States would be able to make this argument that because of someone's ineptitude and their lack of qualifications that I am being harmed. But we know the Supreme Court to be not an honest broker of the law, I would say. And so I would want to have a really airtight, ironclad standing argument to really go into that. And he might just be appointing people in an interim basis, which he has been doing quite a bit, so that he doesn't have to go through, Senate confirmation. So that could be happening as well. But I think the ultimate thing for all of us to know and to remember is this is more information about how broken the system is. They have come in with a wrecking ball,
Mhm.
and I did not like that they came in with a wrecking ball. I wrote a piece about like this, I think it was a year and a half ago, and it was about chainsaws, that this was just an administration of chainsaws, and they were just cutting old growth forests as fast as they could. And they're still doing that. But the thing is that when you cut down old growth forests, you allow lots of new things to grow. The light can finally reach into all these places that light hasn't been able to reach for a long time. And we have to appreciate that opportunity. It is sad. And just like when I was watching, the Obama Center, right? It is sad to see things fall. It is sad to see what could have been. But it would be awful and even worse if we didn't take the opportunity to make things better when we're given that opportunity.
And so, what I would say is that we have to try.
Full
So,
circle, beautiful, friend.
full circle. So we have to try. So we keep that empathy and we keep on trying. And so that's where we're going to end tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining tonight.
Absolutely.
Michelle, I can't tell you how excited I was to get to have you
Oh, I'm
again.
always excited to see you and everyone else here. Thank you all for joining us and happy Father's Day again. Happy solstice. And truly, if you have not yet seen Andor, it really is a wonderful series. Even if Star Wars is not up your alley at all, it really is an incredible show that has a lot of very inspiring passages and characters and storylines. So I highly recommend it.
You know what? I think what I would say is isn't that what life is though? I mean, someone wrote that because someone felt that and believed that. So
Yeah.
that's our lesson for tonight. And I'm happy to hear it. I am here for it because there are days that you're just like so filled up inside and you're not sure what to do. But Michelle, when we do our women's summit and you teach the master class
So
on
excited for
how we
this.
make these big moments, small things into big moments, this is really how you move that 1%, right? How you
Yeah.
find out what you can do and how much movement you can make by just doing a little thing.
Just
So,
try. Right? Just by getting out there and making an effort, even in a race that is unwinnable. What is it that you're doing in that one race that then can inspire someone else to do something else incredible and the next person and the next? And pretty soon you have flock upon flock of butterflies, just taking this message of persistence and hope and resilience and democracy to every corner of the United States. It's incredible, really. But it really starts with each of us doing what we can in our own lives and with the people that we love, people in our network, businesses that we go to, all of those things. So we all have a small part to play that can be huge.
wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank you
night.
so much. Have a wonderful rest
So
of
great to see
Father's
you.
Day. You too. Bye.